I don't want to say this. The rating for my videos are always at the end. So if you don't watch to the end, you probably won't see the rating. It's hidden somewhere. Now, if you've watched a Nigerian film before, you already know something. Okay, we're very good at talking about who acted well and whether the film was entertaining. But films are more than vibes. So on the long take, we slow things down. We look at how the film was put together, not to bash it, not to hype it, but to understand it. A Very Dirty Christmas was produced by Iniedo, and you can tell that a lot of intention went into it. This is not a spoiler video. This is a filmmaking conversation. Let's get into it. Now, let's talk about the big idea of the film. At the heart of this film is one simple idea. Things can look good on the outside and be very dirty underneath. The film uses Christmas, a time we usually connect with the joy, family, and goodness, and flips it. Instead of warmth, we get tension. Instead of peace, we get conflict. And that alone for me is a strong creative choice. You can tell the film wants to talk about a number of things from power to family loyalty to faith to control and the cost of wealth. The ideas are there, very clearly. Where the film struggles a bit is not what it wants to say, but how deeply it sits with what it wants to say. Now, let's talk about the story flow and how the movie, how the film moves. Now, the film moves fast, right? It's one of its biggest strengths. There's always something happening, new information, new tension, new direction, but, fast movements got downside. Some moments that should breathe, they don't. Something important happens, and just when you expect the film to sit with it emotionally, it moves on to the next scene. So instead of feeling certain moments deeply, we just understand them. And that's an important difference. Now let's talk about the direction. I thought it was safe, clear, and controlled. A.K. Mason directs this film in a very clean and straightforward way. Nothing is confusing. Nothing feels careless. You sort of always know what the scene is trying to say, and this is good directing. It's also safe directing. The camera mostly observes. It doesn't challenge. It doesn't linger in discomfort. And for a story about messy people and dirty choices, a bit more discomfort would have helped. Sometimes letting a moment stay quiet is more powerful than cutting away quickly. Now let's go to characters. Strong setups, and I thought the setup was strong, but limited depth. One thing the film does well is setting up its characters. Each main character, the daughters of the chief, they represent a different way of dealing with life. One that believes in faith and patience, one that believes in control and power, and one that believes in survival by any means. Now, the contrast is clear and effective, but after setting them up, the film doesn't always go deep enough with them. We sort of see what they do, we hear what they say, but we don't always sit with what they are struggling with inside. The characters are clear, but it could have been more layered. The acts could have been more layered. Now let's talk about performances. I thought the performances were good, but very comfortable. Performance-wise, the film I think is solid. Nobody does a bad job. Nobody embarrasses the story, but most of the actors stay within what they are already known for. There's one performance that stands out, not because it's dramatic, but because it understands balance. The character is funny, annoying, manipulative, and interesting at the same time. And yeah, just a little spoiler. That's the character that Adedimeji Lateef played. So for me, that kind of balance sort of makes a character feel real. Overall, I thought the performance worked. For me, it did not just stretch. Now let's go to the editing, which I thought was the film's biggest help. If this film works as smoothly as it does, the editor deserves a lot of credit. The pacing is tight. The scenes do not drag. The story keeps moving. Without this editing style, the film could have easily become long and tiring. But again, the same thing comes up, speed versus emotion. Sometimes the cut comes too quickly. You want one more beat, one more reaction, one more moment, and you don't get it. But still, the editing was, I think, one of the best things that happened to this film. Now let's go to the cinematography. I thought it was good, but I didn't think it was expressive enough. The film looks good. The lighting is right, the locations make sense, nothing looks cheap or careless. But the camera mostly shows. It doesn't comment, it doesn't use framing to tell us, much about power, loneliness or tension. The visuals support the story, but they don't add a second meaning. Now, this is fine, but it's also a missed chance. You want to watch something, a particular visual, and read a second meaning to it. Now, let's talk about the sound music score. I thought it was functional. I did not think it was memorable. The sound does its job most of the time, but in louder scenes, especially the party or club scenes, the balance is off. And that for me affects emotional connection. The music supports the mood, but it doesn't guide it. It's present, but it's not powerful. Now let's go to some wild details. Small things matter. There are moments where locations are and events are not fully clear. Celebrations happen, but you're not always sure why. Public spaces are big, but not always grounded in some level of logic. These small things matter because they help the audience stay inside the story. Once you start asking questions like, why is this happening here? You're no longer emotionally present. Now let's talk about Iniedo as a producer. I'm not sure it's the first time as a producer, but I think so. I think it's a good start. The film is organized. The vision is clear. The ambition is obvious. What's missing is not skill. It's boldness. Boldness comes with time. So I know that with time, Ini would, be a lot bolder in her production and her career as a producer, not just an actor. Now, my final thought on A Very Dirty Christmas. The film wants to say something meaningful. It just doesn't always give itself enough time or space to say it fully. It is well made. It is watchable. It's thoughtful. But it could have gone deeper, in my opinion. Uh, well, guys, that's what it is. A Very Dirty Christmas. I don't want to say this. The rating for my videos are always at the end. So if you don't watch to the end, you probably wouldn't see the rating. It's hidden somewhere. But thanks for watching the long take. My name is Dami Dawson.